Welcome to It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a podcast sponsored by the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. Located in the heart of the Texas Hill Country, the museum is dedicated to the preservation and promotion of the American West, especially through the art of the West. In this podcast series, we will visit with artists, art collectors, and gallery directors working in the Western art genre. We'll talk about the history and heritage of Western art, and we'll talk about why talking about Western art is so important. I'm Darrell Beauchamp, the Executive Director of the museum, and I'll be your host for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is a member of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.
Today we have a little bit different set of episodes. We have parts 1 and 2 of Darrell's interview with Quang and Scott Christensen. This is part 1. I hope you will join us for part 2 as well.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a podcast about American art. I'm Darrell Beauchamp, the Executive Director of the museum, and we're glad to welcome today to the podcast in front of a live studio audience. This is kind of exciting. Scott Christensen and Quang Ho. And gentlemen, welcome to the museum.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
to be here. Such an honor to be here.
And you know what's funny, and I tell the story a lot in my podcast, I talk to artists all day long, every day, and we sit and have a conversation about art, your studio in your home, and it just flows, and it's so good. And I put a microphone in front of them, and they panic. They just, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about art. We're going to specifically talk about your art, both individually and then collectively. And then we've got an opportunity in front of the studio audience to let them ask questions. And we're going to let it flow and let it flow naturally. You'll notice I don't have any notes in front of me. This is not a program scripted kind of thing. We want to talk about what people want to hear about with your art. So let's start individually with something I wrote in the book, in the catalog, in my foreword to it. My first sentence is, there's no reason in the world Scott Christensen and Quang Ho should even be friends.
Should be friends.
You shouldn't even be friends. You guys have nothing in common until the point you have everything in common. Does that make sense?
Yeah, he's Batman and I'm Robin.
He's Batman and you're Robin, and I don't know what I am, I'm the mayor, I guess, And I wrote in the essay, Scott comes from Lander, Wyoming, grew up fishing, hunting, exploring the woods and the prairies of Wyoming and Montana and Idaho. And Quang is a refugee from Vietnam and fled that country on the day before Saigon fell, leaving his father, bringing his siblings and mom, and coming to Denver. Yeah. And their worlds are worlds apart. And yet, at some point, and that's, I guess, where I'm going with this, you guys, you both became icons of the Western art world, or of the art world. How does that happen?
Do you remember?
I have no idea.
And they don't even know how it happened.
But I remember the first time I met Scott. I've seen his work before. But there was a connection, and I don't know how to explain it. There was an ease about, we didn't have to, I don't know, there was an easiness about it. So we were just friends ever since then. And the more I get to know Scott, the more I love him. And he's just a big teddy bear is what he is. He acts tough, but he's just a big teddy bear. But I've always loved his work. And he started showing me his sketches for, he is one of the most studied artists. He thinks about it in such a beautiful way. And you can see it in his work. I'm not disciplined in that way. I'm kind of wild. I get it there eventually. But with Scott, there's this, you see his sketches are so beautiful. So I love his thinking, I love his paintings. But when I get talking to him about who he is, he played football. He's broken in all kinds of places right now, you don't even know it. And when I brought Adrienne to his studio a long time ago in Idaho, she loves to fish. So I said, Scott will take you out fly fishing maybe. Because I say, Scott, can you do that? He said, sure. He takes her out, but he was crippled. His hip was hurting. He could barely walk. He waited out in the middle of the stream and wouldn't quit until she caught a little trout, in a rapid, and then limped back to shore. I'm like, oh my God.
He tossed me a stick, though.
At one point, I was worried whether he could get back to shore or not. And so I grabbed a stick, not a stick, a half of a log, and I floated it down to him so that he can brace himself back to the shore. And he reached down, and he goes, and it floated right by him. So anyway.
That was.
But I mean, how'd you guys get together? Your perspective.
I've known Quang for quite a while, and I knew he's a wild man. And what I realized is I kind of came from a background of a lot of athletics and a lot of just crazy, throwing your body into everything, throwing your body into things that you shouldn't do. And so I was doing a lot of things that to me were not beneficial necessarily now.
Dangerous lifestyle, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what I learned from what I liked about Quang is he's that way in the art world to me. He's a wild man. The guy just does stuff that you don't expect. And I think when I got to meet him, I started seeing more and more of that. And I just love seeing how he's thinking and trying to process things. And so we've gone on a few things, done a few things together and I got to watch him shoot a shotgun in the air a couple times. And
Shooting.
in the air, I mean, he cleaned up on some stuff. But it was fun to watch him typically constantly gets out of his own element. And tries new things. And to me, that's one of the most important parts of life, and is to get out and experience life. And time and memories, I think that means the most to me.
Thank you, Scott.
And spending time with great people is.
So let's talk individually for just a second. I will start with Scott. Your life's not always been about art.
No.
I mean, you, like I said, growing up in Lander, Wyoming, played football, hunted, fished, went to Chadron State University, threw the javelin, played football, and we've got some photos in one of the cases of him, number 95, I think, uniform.
Yeah.
But at one point in your football career, it all ended pretty quickly in an accident. You were damaged to where you couldn't play football any longer. Pick that story up there and talk about.
I was damaged for a few years. I just didn't want to believe I was. I was going numb to my waist for weeks at a time. And I was going numb to my waist playing college football from just contact and things like that. And I also competitive wrestled and freestyle Greco-Roman, and I threw the javelin, and I competitive powerlifted. Just everything that can tear your body up, that's what I tried.
Yeah, they're asking you that you put that microphone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That'll do it.
I don't think they can hear it in the back. Is that better? Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm not used to eating microphones.
Just eat a microphone. Just kind of put it on your chin. It's clean. We share it. Yeah.
I feel like it's going to eat me. It was a difficult time to have everything just stop completely, having to decide if I wanted to be in a wheelchair or not. And I said, I just got to move on. And I completely lost my identity. I had no reason to be a painter other than my life changed at that point. I accepted Christ in my life, and it changed everything. I realized, too, that I was living a life of trying to find, searching, and after that search, it's changed the way I started seeing everything, and time and memories became one of the most important parts to me. I started studying art. I didn't know anything about it. I just had to take an art class because I had to for requirements. And
How old were you at the time?
I was a senior in college. That's when
Senior in college?
Senior in college, I changed to art, yeah. I had to take an art class for a requirement, and I took that art class, and I was just the rebel in there, I guess, because I would try to paint things that looked natural, and they were trying to do crazy shit. Yeah.
But you had some experience with your grandfather?
Yeah, my grandfather is in a wheelchair. He got in a tractor accident, and he lived about an hour away. So I'd go visit him, and he'd be painting, and my grandmother would be, they're little German. She's about this big. And she'd run around there, and just bitch at him for the smell of oil paint while she's smoking a cigarette and running around the house. Yeah. It was good times.
And it's at that point that art and fly fishing became an integral part of your life.
Good memory. What happened at that point is when I completely lost my identity. I started to go to a place called Soldier Creek, and I would fly fish almost every day. While I was going to college, I found a way to drive there, and I would just sit on the banks and watch these fish and tie flies and try to paint. And the paintings were, they're just terrible. You should see them. They were so bad. And people think that you've never had to go through that. And I'm like, I think probably We all painted the same when we started. You'd be surprised, yeah. And in other words, bad. Ugly's one thing. Ugly's one thing, but big and ugly is a different thing too. And I was ignorant enough to think I could do that. I'd put 4x8 sheets of plywood up on the wall. I'd nail it to the wall and just start painting. And man, they were nasty. But can't say I didn't have the want to, right?
And so your approach, I mean, you came to art a little later in life than somebody who's been painting since they were pretty much their entire life. And we'll turn our attention to Quang here, because at 17, 18, you were a one-man show.
I was a sophomore in high school.
Sophomore in high school, one-man show in Denver, Colorado, and sells out, right? I mean, it's...
Well, but it was all like $30, $40, $50.
But, you know, nonetheless, sell out, right? I mean, these guys are great marketers, and they don't even want to market themselves, but sell out. But your life wasn't Lander, Wyoming, it was Vietnam. Talk about your life experience to get up to that point where you had that first one-man show.
Yes, I came to America in 1975 at the age of 12. And my mother, the story even goes back further. When I was 4 years old during the Tet Offensive in 1967, my dad was captured by the Viet Cong, the VC, the communists, and taken away. And we didn't know he was alive or dead because we figured they'd kill him. But then my mom was left with 6 kids, and growing up there, and when Saigon fell, she brought us all we left the country a day before Saigon fell. And then from there, we went to Korea, and then from there we went to...
And that's something, I mean, you left Vietnam, your homeland, leaving your dad behind the day before Saigon falls. And I mean, that's TV news, right? We all of us old enough to remember seeing you leave, right? We didn't know it was you at the time.
Yeah.
But the country was in turmoil, life was in turmoil, and you left there and went to Korea.
Right. Yeah, we went to Korea, almost ended up living there, but then it's a very funny story. Here's a single mom and 9 little kids. She was a country girl. She had survival instincts. So one day, the U.S. Embassy came into that school where the refugees were and asked, any of you have relatives in America? And my mom raised her hands, and here I am, and I'm not sure who the relative is. So you're stuck with me. But anyway, so we came over, and our family was sponsored by the First Reformed Church in Denver. It's a Dutch Reformed church. And so I grew up, learned English. First year, I didn't know any English. So I just sat in class and drew every day while my classmates had to do real homework. And it took me about a year and a half before I was so mad I couldn't understand anything. So I worked really hard to understand English. And so anyway, but I was drawing since I was 4 years old. But I didn't know anything about painting until I was about 19 when I met my mentor, who explained to me the difference between light and shadow and seeing things, you know what I mean? So he gave me the vocabulary of painting, like we talk about values and color and structure and all of that. But before that, I thought being a good artist is able to draw something really well. And that's just not. We could go into that. It's so much fun, because as soon as I understood that, my life changed, and painting became a whole different thing. I no longer drew things or paint things. I painted relationships of colors and values, and we can get into all that. So that's what I teach.
And we will, just a few minutes. But so you're in Denver, Colorado at that point, and then tragedy strikes. Your mother is killed in an automobile accident.
Right.
And you're left to raise your siblings.
So I was the oldest boy. My mom had 8 kids, 9 months and 10 minutes apart, as they say. We're all like, and she died when I was 18, just graduated from high school, about to go into art school. And I became the guardian for my younger brother and sisters. So we just stuck it out, and I didn't know how to raise kids. I didn't know how to cook even. At one point, I just went to the King Soopers at 2 in the morning after I'm doing homework and everything else, and load up a cart full of frozen burritos and stuff it in the freezer, and that's what they ate.
That's what they ate?
So, yeah. But now they're grown, they're wonderful people, they're all over the country.
And then Denver Art Institute, is that right?
I went to
the College of Art and started this career. In effect, years before Scott while he was still hunting and fishing and banging up his body, you were already studying art. So again, in my essay, there's no reason these guys should be friends, right? I mean, they come from completely different backgrounds, and yet at some point we merged together, and now I see every reason they should be friends. And the reason the art world is lucky to have both of you. It's funny how the path takes. You smell paint in your grandfather's studio and it inspires you, and you're forced into raising your siblings. And so it's a fascinating two American stories, one an immigrant story and one of a good old boy from Lander, Wyoming. But they come together and do some of the most amazing art in the art world. Talk about each individually, your day. What does your day look like? I mean, I love this question because I'll sit down and talk to artist Becky Patterson, and her day is completely different than Denise Malky, is completely different than Herman Walker, is completely different from, and I'm fascinated by that. Are you a 8 to 5 painter or 2 o'clock in the morning painter? I mean, what does your day look like, Scott?
I never have an idea about that.
You never have an idea what your day's going to look like?
I mean, I think I've got an idea, and it changes every time. Yeah. That's for me. I mean, I'll start going, okay, I'm going to get onto this and then on that, and I get an idea. I'll take my dog for a walk, have some coffee, look at some other art, and go, some other things I'm starting to see or learn, and go, oh, I don't know what I'm doing with that. Let me think about this. And all of a sudden, I'm down some rabbit trail. And that's the way I learn the most, is I take all those trails. They're pretty interesting. Some of them work and most of them don't. But I think that's really the way to find yourself as a painter still, is what Quang does a lot of, in this experimenting with things and seeing things and approaching it in a different way, trying to, and it's not just to be different for different sake, it's you actually do see something that you want to try. And to me, that's the biggest thing that helps me find, is idea finding, putting it together to try to make the statement you want. And so I'll work a day, might be, if I work for 6 hours straight on something, it's a long time for me. I can't do much more than that. I'll have, and sometimes I'll go, that's not true. Every once in a while I'll just have long times that I'll get up in the middle of the night even and do it. I've been known to do that, but I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's pretty obsessive when it does. But I have no idea how I'm going to do it every day.
And I will point out, your studio is attached to your home.
Yeah.
And so you walk down the stairs and you're in this, it's a magnificent studio, and works are all over, although they're not now because we raided the whole place.
Yeah. I would say, Darrell, though, that one of the things I do pretty frequently is when I don't consider myself much of an outdoor painter. I do paint outside a few hundred a year, usually depend on the year, 100 to 300 a year outdoors, but they're mostly studies. I really go out to learn. I'll make myself not go over, say, an hour. I'll try to get information rather than trying to make the painting. And I feel like I'm bringing more an authentic read to it, and a different read rather than presupposing I know everything that's going on.
One of the things I want to point out is when I was there in picking up the art, Scott was kind enough to show me his truck, right? We open up the back of the truck and there's an art studio in the truck, right? I mean, there's all these shelves and paints and brushes and easels and fly fishing gear right up there in the corner, and chairs, and I mean, he's got basically a rolling studio, and that was just kind of cool, right? But go out for an hour at a time to study and then bring it back to the studio.
Yeah, maybe.
Do you do a lot of sketching?
I mostly just sketch with paint out there. I do a lot of composition drawings when I start, but once in a while. Otherwise, I just go straight at the content. I'm looking for that content as much as I can, and I'm trying to stay objective with it. And that's the way I study outdoors.
What do you mean by content?
I'm wanting to see how the light and the shadow read together, and then I want to see what kind of temperatures am I seeing in the light and in the shadow. What kind of key do I want to see it in? Because some of the painters I study, when I look at somebody like Sorolla and how he would open up his shadows, and Zorn did the same thing so much later in his life, and so did Sargent. He didn't use those heavy darks until later in his life, and I've realized that's how I can control those middle values. I try to get that tonality that I think I'm seeing, and then work toward the dark patterns.
And one of the quotes we've got on one of the walls, and I don't even remember where it is, says basically for this entire show, you worked with 3 basic colors.
I usually will start with 3. It doesn't have to be the same 3. You will usually start with 3. It's not usually the same 3, but I did this whole show mostly I would start with cobalt, Venetian, yellow ochre, and white. And I didn't get me too heavy. It kept the tone and the value, the key up, and then I'd work toward the darks. If I start putting patterns in, I started studying Gustav Baumann, the wood prints, and the more I was studying the way he did patterns through his painting, I'd start developing ways to pull the painting together with middle values, and then with a color or 2 or 18. And then just trying to pull the whole together toward the end with the darks. I try to avoid the darks for a while.
And Quang, what does your day look like? Again, same question. Huh?
Chaos.
Chaos.
No, I feel every day is like I wake up in the morning and I wade through all this other stuff to try to get to the easel. And sometimes that doesn't happen until 2 in the afternoon. So it's just like wading through all the stuff I have to do. But now with Liam along too, that becomes part of the equation. But it's ultimately it's about getting up to the easel and getting some work done. So there's no set time. Adrian and I, this last year painting for this show, we didn't take much vacation at all. We just wake up, get everything done so we can paint as long as we can, because it takes that kind of attention and demand of your time. All the paintings that you see in here, they have been on and off my easel for 1.5 years. Interestingly, this painting in the corner of the figure with the owl, that was the quickest painting I did. And I think I got the whole thing done in probably a week. And then I just fussed with it. But some of the smallest paintings, that thing's been on and off my easel for almost 1 year. And it changes, all of them. And then in the middle of that, I'll start a new one. And then take as long as it go.
And you're working out of 2 different studios, right? I mean, 9 months of the year, you're in Pennsylvania. And you guys come to Denver in the summer.
Right.
So you haul a lot of stuff back and forth.
I started bunch of these in Denver and then hauled them to Pennsylvania for that 9 months, and that's where most of them were done. And then we hauled 65 paintings before they were framed, including Adrian's solo show that's in Denver now, back to Denver in our Ford Expedition. We fit the whole thing in there. It was amazing. And then we came, and then I put them all back up, framed them, and then finished them in Denver before you picked them all up.
Right.
But my day, I don't have a pattern. I'm as chaotic as my paintings are.
Do either of you listen to music while you're painting?
Yes.
I mean, what do you listen to inside? I mean, and put the microphone right up there. You know.
Sorry, I just feel like I'm eating something, and it doesn't. I listen to a lot of different things. When I early on started painting, I started really introducing myself to classical music, and I listened to a lot of that. Always loved it changes the pace of the way I paint, depending on what I listen to. And I find myself purposely changing the music as per what I need for what I'm working on. Because I know a pace. If I need to slow down, I'll put something different on. If I need to speed up, I'll listen to some crazy stuff if I need to. I just don't know that music is a really big part of what I do. I take music out with me all the time outside as well. But it's something about the mood that it can create. Especially one of my favorite pieces of music is Gorecki's Symphony No. 3.
Which one?
Gorecki, Symphony No. 3. And it's really moody, but it changes in a subtle ways the whole time. And Don Upshaw's singing in there, and it's haunting. It's really different. But I'd go from that to I Need a Little Willie Nelson and possibly a beer.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's that Texas connection coming out.
Yeah, that's right.
What about you, Quang?
Yeah, no, the same thing. Neil, I'm listening less and less to music. Once in a while, when I want to me, my favorite piece is Beethoven's Piano Concerto number, the Emperor Concerto,
yeah.
And then the other one is his Violin Concerto. Those things just send me.
I think the thing we got to make sure you pointed out is Liam is in the studio a lot.
Yeah.
He's in Daddy's house, as he calls it, right?
Yeah, Daddy's house,
And
Mommy's house.
cute little side story. I was backing a truck up to deliver the art, or to pick up the art, and Quang was back there giving me the comeback sign, and I looked in my left mirror, and Liam is down there doing the same thing. And he's looking at his dad, and he's looking at me, and Quang said, "Stop." And Liam went, "Stop." And I got out, and Liam walked up to me and said, "Good job." Good job. So that was my introduction to Liam. But he's a part of that life, right? You guys paint.
Yep.
And you and Adrian have studios at opposite ends of the house.
Yeah.
I mean, basically.
In Denver, yeah.
And different approaches. And it's an interesting thing when 2 artists live together, John and Edith Maskey, who are painters, and I think they're here today, paint in the same room at the same time, listening to the same music, and they could touch each other. They're that close. I mean.
Oh, no, listen. The reason why Adrian has a separate
and Quang
studio,
are in different parts of the world, right? So
you want me to tell you why?
Yeah.
Because she won't put up with my 70s music. The Bee Gees can only go so far for her.
You listen to the Bee Gees? You listen to Bee Gees?
Yeah.
Ooh,
It's a fascinating part of my
Staying
job.
alive. Staying alive.
that gives me full body wiggles, man.
Full
that's
body
that's
wiggle.
like my, never mind.
And a fascinating part of my world is getting to see artist studios. And everywhere I go, I mean, because they're all completely different. I guess the point is do what makes you productive and creative
Right.
and all of that. One of the things that we get asked a lot, I try to ask artists is, I mean, you guys are both established in the game now. Do you have that one piece of advice? Before we turn this into an art discussion that goes way over my head and they start talking about the things they want to talk about, I'm trying to get some of these other little questions out of the way for that young student. Do you have, what would you say you got to do? Is it just paint? Is it draw? Is it attend workshops? What's that advice you give to the young students here, the young artist?
Yeah.
And the old.
And the old ones and the older ones who are trying to. But what do they need to be listening to or paying attention to in their world?
Everything. I think it's really important to study a lot more, to look at art and actually ask questions like, what were they trying to do? Why were they doing this? What were they thinking? Those kind of questions are important. Ask yourself. Good answers to tough questions is what Winston Churchill said he spent 90% of his time on. And good answers to tough questions is how paintings are finished, in my opinion. We're always answering questions to ourselves like, what am I doing with this? And there's not always answers. It's experimenting the whole time. But I think one of the most important parts for me also is really good friendship with artists that you really appreciate and love being around, because it goes back to what are you going to spend your time doing with and with whom. And the time and memories are really one of the most important parts to me. And I happened to meet one of my best friends who's here today, Gene Costanza. I met him and it changed everything about my life, and I can't tell you how many ways. And I won't tell you how many ways. I'm sure he'll have something to say. But
Gene's here somewhere. Gene, where are you? In the very back, yeah. Get to know his work as well, yeah.
Yeah, great painter. And he's
So surround yourself with artists you admire.
that and people you want to be around because they feed you. And mostly I've noticed that I seem to be around people that live an artistic life, whether it's painting or not. I've noticed that's really important because it's not always about painting. I mean, I have the experiences outdoors that actually drive my ideas. That's what brings me the most joy as experiencing those same things.
What about you, Quang? Advice.
I think the most important thing if you're going to become an artist is to have your drawing skills so fluent that it's like breathing. There's no way around it.
Is that muscle memory?
Yes, but part of it, yeah.
I mean, it's
part
just drawing, lots of
yeah,
drawing.
it's recognized, it's understanding spatial relationships, but also hand-eye coordination. So it's like a musician. If you're going to play the piano, you got to practice the scales until you don't have to think about the scales anymore. So that's the number one thing. But I could say that's just the beginning. I know that there are a lot of artists who are that skilled, but they don't have that next level. And that next level is like what Scott is saying, is now you have to ask, what is painting all about? And I had a couple of epiphanies, very important epiphanies, along the way that changed who I am as a painter, that built. The first one was given to me by my mentor when I was about 19. I met this gypsy from New York. His name is Rennie Bruin. And he could tell that I was the hot shot in the art school, but he knows I didn't know anything about painting. And he proved it to me in one instance. And so we used to have life drawing where we'd go in and we'd paint the model. And I didn't have him in class yet. He was the head of the drawing department. But he was this crusty old, looks like Karl Marx, with the big mustache, the glasses. And he would walk into class and he goes, I'm drawing this beautiful drawing of the model with acrylic painting, actually. And he looked at it and he says, hey, what are you doing? And I said, I'm painting the model. And he says, and he sniffed at it, and he walked out. 3 hours later, with 5 minutes left in class, and I've been rendering this beautiful figure, everything's proportionally correct. And he came in and he took my brush, and he says, here. He took my brush, nudged me aside, because he had sniffed against there. He looked at it, he goes, here, grabbed my brush, nudged me aside, obliterated everything I did in 5 minutes. And the rest of my classmates were like, they were in shock because they couldn't believe he did that. But he handed my brush back and didn't say a thing, walked out. and I'm here with my jaws on the ground. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was so beautiful, painterly, but he didn't explain to me what it, and I can tell you what, now I can explain it to you. What he did was, I was sitting there seeing the arm, the head, one part to another. He came in and he painted the light on everything and the shadow and everything with beautiful, luscious paint. And so I didn't see that big picture. So what he taught me was that seeing and understanding what you see is a whole different game than just being able to render something that your mind thinks is there. So I came to him and he taught me this, gave me this beautiful vocabulary of painting. He said, all of painting happens, there's 8 visual approaches, he calls them, that happen in all of art history. And light and shadow, which is only one of them. So that's why Van Gogh is not light and shadow, Van Gogh is different. And Jackson Pollock, we can go down all that. But anyway, the whole point is that practice your drawing like crazy until you can, and then explore what painting is about. And you can only do that by exploring and reading and understanding. There's a reason why the great masters are great. There's more than just rendering something well.
And you mentioned Sorolla.
Yeah.
Joaquin Sorolla. Who are the others?
For me,
Who are those masters that these young people and these older people who are wanting to be who should they be looking at? What works are important in your world?
And it goes back to that same thing that Quang's talking about when it goes to your drawing. When I think of compositions, the way people are drawing things, when I see Edward Compton, for instance, as a landscape painter, and he thinks different, his shapes are different, the way he approaches. So I'll look at different people for different things. I spent many years trying to understand Anders Zorn. And Anders Zorn to me was one of the biggest influences I saw.
The Zorn palette.
Not the Zorn palette. Yes, that did influence me, but most of
But his work.
Zorn was Prince Eugene from Sweden collected a lot of his work, so he let about a bunch of it out in '94. And we went over to Sweden to see those, and I went to Mora, his hometown. But as I looked at the paintings, they weren't about specifically color. They were about connectivity of everything and how things connected, how the lights and shadows played off of each other, and trying to find that relationship and how subtle he could put a back of a woman in shadow. It doesn't matter if it's a rock or a back to me. It's just going to connect with the water in the light, and you're going, okay. So he's moving your eye through with soft edges, hard edges, and he reworked what I was most impressed with Zorn is how many layers he actually covered those things just over and over. You don't see that when you look at the books and in quick images of them. You take those close-ups and you realize just how many layers it took him to orchestrate an entire painting. So Zorn is a big one. Levitan is a big one. When I saw him, I just thought, I got to start again. Carl Rungus, his ability to study, when Carl Rungus he came over from Germany and he came to Cora, Wyoming. And he started painting studies outdoors to try to learn to put his wildlife into a landscape so he could understand it more. He started just going out and painting dozens of them. He'd nail them or pin them to a tree after he'd paint them, and they'd try to, the horses way up in the mountains. And he just learned to understand what was going on as a landscape, so then his whole work changed. All of them have their own stories. You can see the classical approach of Sargent and then how he started opening up his shadows more to the
So
left.
I'm hearing a theme of find those artists that inspire you.
Yes.
And study their works and pick them apart and figure out how you can incorporate it into your work.
What makes it great? What makes it great is the question.
Who were the artists that inspired you?
I was going to ask Scott this. When you saw Zorn's work, so you were figuring this out on your own when you looked at his work. So you studied it and you wondered how he did it and you could figure that out.
I went with Gerhardt's, Dan, and we got to know each other really early and really appreciated
The artist Dan Gerhardt.
Dan Gerhardt, yeah. And we've been friends for a long time, but I was still trying to understand painting in general, let's say. And what I could see in Zorn was a rawness to his work. And it's just especially those little studies. You just see them, and there wasn't anything extravagant about them, but the relationship to things as they related. It's like music, those small inspired decisions mean everything to a painting.
Those little realizations and epiphanies that you have when you look at other great artwork, those are important.
Yeah.
But it really depends on what inspires you too. I mean, some artists respond to Van Gogh, other ones respond to Sargent or Andrew Wyeth. So it depends on who you love. But it's important to understand when you find somebody who you really love, try to study what makes their work so great. And Rembrandt painted light and shadow. And it was interesting. I'm sitting here looking at all Scott's painting, and each one I go way deep into his paintings. I'm looking at my paintings. Bam! You stop right there. I'm right there on the surface. But look at his face. It just goes. I'm like, why haven't I explored space? I have never been interested in exploring space yet. But now I want to explore space now. But all of his paintings. Look at that painting there. It just goes. It's so grand and big, and it's just a different kind of thinking with relationships of values and color that I don't have that vocabulary yet. I haven't really explored it. And so it's different. My paintings are about rhythm in a painting. And it's a different thing, right? For me, Nikolai Feshin is wonderful at that. He's just so great at that. But if you want space, which I absolutely love too, I mean, George Inness is one of my very favorite painters. Twachtman is a different kind of thing. Sargent is the greatest virtuoso who ever lived, in my estimation. I don't think anybody can paint as beautifully and as fluidly, as easily as he. It's like speaking to him, and he's wonderful. Zorn, interestingly, as great as he was, limited his colors down to those simple palette, and it did great for him. But I always wondered why he didn't explore color more. After half of his life, he exhausted what he could do with those three colors, but he stopped exploring color.
Let's talk about workshops real quickly. We offer here at the Museum of Western Art 8 or 10 workshops a year, a couple of sculpture usually, and there's lots of folks in this audience I know that have taken workshops from us. And I highly recommend them because you get to spend 3-4 days with great artists. You guys both do workshops, and it's an important part of your teaching aspect of what you do. And so if you see a Scott Christensen workshop and a Quang Ho workshop, you should go ahead and sign up. Take those workshops. Go to Pennsylvania, go to Idaho, go wherever they're teaching them, because everybody I've talked to who's taken a workshop, and there's some people in this audience who took one 15 years ago, right? They've remained friends. It's such a good experience for them. But workshops, important?
For me, teaching has been something I didn't like for a while because I was learning so much and I didn't know how to put words together about what I was learning. But the more I started trying to come up with good answers again to how to explain what I'm trying to understand, I started reading a lot of different versions of things, but mainly having to come up with my own understanding and how I wanted to put it together. I think teaching has a big part for me in, I have to teach now at least a little bit, because it brings to the surface the issues I'm trying to deal with. It brings to the surface all those issues. And I can see that the very things I'm trying to teach are the things I'm trying to work out. And so that's important to me to stay on that, because as I'm working things out and I have to explain it, I'm talking to myself too, mostly. But I really enjoy giving back, yeah.
And we know Quang talks to himself because of 50 personalities that are in there, right?
But aren't you teaching online a little bit, or what is that thing that you're doing?
Yeah, I've got an adventure. It's called Adventure of Painting, or Adventure, I think it's called. But it's a series of videos. They're short. They're like 5 and 20-minute videos, but they're content of things that I do to go through an entire painting. Anyway, I never know how I'm going to have to solve the problems in painting. Sometimes it's reestablish your lines and shapes again, and I'm doing that all the time. I'm reestablishing good drawing back into the painting, redoing the shapes, watching my edges, and orchestrating how I want you to see this thing. And I think that is a really big part for me. It has to be.
I was at both of their studios recently and have an experience with each of them where I cringed because Scott had a beautiful painting, looked like it was sitting on top of a trash box.
Oh, it was, yeah.
And it's a magnificent, wonderful piece, and I pulled it down, wondering, why is this beautiful painting? And he said, I think I'm going to scrape it off and start over. And I'm thinking, my God, please don't do that. But you couldn't make it work.
I will. I think I will.
But you're working on it for a number of years now.
But I go through these things, and I'll chisel them down, and I'll sand them down until I get kind of a ghost of this. Yeah, he told me he's going to sand this painting down, and please don't. Yeah. And then a similar story, in Quang's studio, we went next door to, forgive me. Dan's studio, right there together. And where Quang's studio is this chaos and mess of a place, and it's beautifully wonderful. You walk in next door to a painting friend of his, Dan, and it's an austere
clean, surgical-looking place where he's got one painting on the wall. And they all work differently. But the point I'm getting to is that Dan had one of your paintings that you had given him because you couldn't make it work. And he had scraped and repainted, and it was kind of a Dan and Quang show at that point.
Yeah.
And Quang telling him, my God, that's better. That's so much better. And I just thought, my God, guys. Anyway.
Yeah.
But do you start over a lot?
Oh gosh, yes. Oh yeah. I don't know how many of these paintings will have a painting underneath it because I've painted over a bad painting. There's a few of them.
I've got black lights. I'm gonna maybe I'll turn the lights off.
You know,
and just look.
that's
Right?
really interesting. There's a number of them in here.
And
that one has a different.
And I
painting.
know that's true because I've been very gifted. Both of these gentlemen have given me a small painting for my collection. And on the back of Scott's, it's a waterfall scene, right? It's a Idaho, Montana waterfall scene. I don't even know which waterfall, but, you know, I love it, absolutely love it. You flip it over and it says Paris, France, or somewhere, right? It was a painting that started out that he scraped. I mean, there may be another painting underneath it. I need to get the black light out and look. And your case is the same, right? I mean,
oh yeah, I think one of I'll give you advice right now that's useful for me now, and it took me a long time to get over that fear, but now there's no attachment to anything that I do, nothing. It's really important. If you want to grow fast, don't be afraid. If you don't like something, and don't think, oh, it was like. Don't it was better 10 minutes ago. Don't go there. Just keep going.
Don't save it if you don't like it. Don't put it out there if you don't like it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. It's really part of this learning process of finding out what you arrive at. You know.
Well, you know what's really important about that, which I couldn't agree more. What's really important of that is if you don't allow yourself the luxury of losing some things, you're not going to experiment, and you will not get better because you're going to paint so tentatively that. It's just going to be you're just sneaking up on everything, and at the end you sneak even more, and it just doesn't work that way to me.
You end up spinning your wheels.
So don't hang on to a painting just because you've got investment in it and time on it. If it doesn't suit you and you're not willing to sign it, scrape it, sand it down, start over.
That works in life too, I think. Hang on to anything.
Just don't hang on to the things that you wouldn't sign your name to. Let's talk about it. We appreciate that, and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so
Darrell.
much.
Thank you guys.
We appreciate it.
And let me.
Thank you.
And of course, I want to do an opportunity. Books are for sale in the museum store, $22 plus tax. Get them now while you can. And they're going to be in town a little while longer, not much, because there's some airplane flights to catch. But you can maybe get them signed. Thank you for coming to the Museum of Western Art. Thank you for coming today. And ladies and gentlemen, one last round of applause for Scott Christensen and Quang Ho. Thank you. And It's Art has been a production of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network in Kerrville, Texas. Come see the Museum of Western Art at museumofwesternart.com. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a production of the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. We hope you'll visit the museum in person. We're located at 1550 Bandera Highway in Kerrville, Texas. Find out more about us by going to www.museumofwesternart.com. And we hope you'll join us next time for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is produced by the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.